in treats, what do? You buy your pet a nice treat. You expect that bag to last 30 days opened. And that's where mold can become a real problem. And so, yes, that is evolving. It's clean label. So we're using ferment products to actually inhibit molds in those treats. But we're really trying to create, or at least the marketers of pet food are trying to create something with appeal to the pet parent. It's got to look like something that they're going to eat or would consider eating. It's got to smell right. It's got to have ingredient deck that they recognize, not only just in terms of the functional ingredients, but also carrots and the culinary and nutritional inputs that wouldn't necessarily be species appropriate or considered species appropriate 20 years ago are accepted.
Hello, me folks. Welcome back to the MeatsPad podcast. We continue here at the RMC 78th here in Columbus, Ohio. And there's a conversation that we've had, not very intentional about pet food, but I think we continue to have questions and projects, ongoing projects in Mexico and in the U.S. And we have with us Rob Ames. He's the business development director, and he works for Corbion for 10 years. We're talking 10 years seems...
It shows. Your viewers will see 10 plus years on this face for sure.
He's based in Kansas City, as I am, and I think there's a lot to talk about today, but we can dive into this. Rob, tell us a bit about the evolution of pet food, what you've seen 10, 15 years ago, and what we see now, some of the trends in this growing industry.
No, it's fascinating. So I came into my role. I'm a meat guy, as many of your listeners are, and the attendees of this conference are. And so for my even for my father and for friends, the association between meat and pet food it's always been linked, but it's not been necessarily strategic, and it's becoming far more strategic than it was. So when I entered the industry, knowing meat, knowing slaughter, knowing processing, but not knowing pet food at all, really. Pet food, the linkage was really co-products, right? So rendered materials, very low cost, nice outlet for the product, nutritionally great for the dog and cat, goes into the dry dog cat food diet and so forth. And where Corbion is participating in that is in selling a lot of lactic acid for decontamination purposes. So some of your listeners may or may not know that salmonella is actually an adulterant in a finished pet food. The risk is not necessarily to the dog or cat, but it's to the toddler that reaches into that bowl and consumes potentially pet food that could be tainted with salmonella. And so when they enrobe that dry kibble with a fat coating, it's skipped the extrusion process. Extrusion is a very effective kill step. It skips that. So you put chicken fat on that kibble, you have a risk. And so prior to my time at Corbion, long time in the industry, folks have used lactic acid for that purpose. That business continues to expand as the pet industry understands the risk and the need for mitigation. So that was kind of my orientation. But what is happening and has been happening for some time is this humanization trend. And it's gone from, your listeners will recognize the advertisements they see on TV. Pet foods, or go into a local store, you see a pet food that looks like a sausage, looks like a pate, it's refrigerated. Characteristically, it's a meat product, and it's a meat product in every sense, in a food safety sense, in a spoilage sense, in a quality sense. And so we're finding a lot of project work to do to get our ingredient solutions into these pet foods where the pet food company may be coming new to the refrigerated space entirely. They're looking at a lot of pathogens that they haven't dealt with before because they're commonly CPG companies. And so it's been a fun time. There's a lot of challenges and opportunities there, but definitely the slope is up with respect to consumer demand for that kind of product, and the value of the product is really, it's on par with what we do in processed meats.
Would you consider the growth, especially what in your current role, be on the more like treats, or more like a process type of what you mentioned, that pate? What maybe because there's the treatment, because when you talk about treats, it's more dehydration and combining it with some heat treatment with humidity, right, for salmonella in specific. And sometimes a lot of the people, they don't know that you have to have a combination, humidity and heat combined to help with salmonella reduction.
Right, right. So unfortunately, the jargon in the industry hasn't kept pace with the innovation. So commonly, pet food manufacturers talk about wet and dry foods and treats. That's kind of those are how they bucket things. Well, there's tremendous diversity within those. And wet foods, historically, has been canned cat food, right? Retorted product. Lots of the food safety issues are addressed there. It's shelf stable, things like that. Well, anymore, the diversity of products in treats, for example, we all kind of grew up with the dog biscuit, hard as a rock. You can hammer a nail with it. And those are still out there. But you see a lot of these jerky-style treats that are prone to the same spoilage issues and food safety concern you just mentioned. Cook cycle, getting salmonella kill in that product, and then extending the shelf life of it. The difference is you see a lot more mold inhibitors in those type of products because, and this, it comes to logic when you really think it through. You think of, okay, I purchase a jerky at a convenience store at Walmart for my road trip. I've consumed that bag in probably an hour. Most people maybe 2 to 6 hours. So there's not really a shelf life issue once you've opened that package. In treats, what do? You buy your pet a nice treat. You expect that bag to last 30 days opened. And that's where mold can become a real problem. And so, yes, that is evolving. It's clean label. So we're using ferment products to actually inhibit molds in those treats. And that's a growth area. But then you get into what I'm calling refrigerated, some would call human grade, which I don't love the term just because it's a little bit obscure. But we're really trying to create, or at least the marketers of pet food are trying to create something with appeal to the pet parent. It's got to look like something that they're going to eat or would consider eating. It's got to smell right. It's got to have an ingredient deck that they recognize, not only just in terms of the functional ingredients, but also carrots and the culinary and nutritional inputs that wouldn't necessarily be species appropriate or considered species appropriate 20 years ago are accepted. And so when you're taking these vegetable and meat combinations, even though you're cooking them, that carryover the spores that are in there and the carryover spoilage is there that you're going to have a hard time with shelf life. pH can be high. And so that's where we're rolling up our sleeves with those type of companies and saying, okay, what's the listeria risk? How do we control it? What's the spore former risk? How do we control that? Shelf life, how do you manage that from a microbial view? Antioxidants in there as well. So they're coming along with where meat has been, but admittedly, some of their challenges are greater because the ingredients they're using tend to bring in some spoilage organisms. They're complex formulations, they're high pH, and usually when customers, unfortunately, I think this is the evolution of that business, is when customers come to us, they've already set the formula, right? They're not building the formula for shelf life, they're adjusting the shelf life for formula, and then finding out that they need to go further.
And even more, they have already bought the equipment and set the line for that. And they ask you, hey, can you help us? Well, we have already have everything in line. And you start to ask questions that sometimes because of the pace that you mentioned in the beginning, you have a very quick pace industry. And sometimes you start developing something because you got your boss telling you, hey, you gotta be quick. And sometimes you don't think about those questions, like about rice, incorporating rice. What's the concern about incorporating rice in this? Talking about microbiological concern there, and then vegetables, and then combining all those things in a pate, and then okay, whether or not what ingredients am I using? Am I only looking at heat treatment, and then am I adding a HPP treatment at the end? What type of ingredients am I adding that are heat resistant, right? Because sometimes there's a lot of things that you need to have a meat scientist, food scientist in place to think about those factors.
No doubt. And these companies are hiring those type of folks. It's good news for the meat scientists that are here. But even still, there's an understandable learning curve. And we're no different than that. We're learning project to project what we can do.
I have a question for you on the mold growth and more like a technical things. When we were suggesting processors and they want to increase the shelf life, looking at mold, because I had that question before. Hey, am I adding the mold growth before putting it in the small house or putting it in the oven? Are you applying it on the spray afterwards? Maybe I think that's good follow-up questions on what options are out there for people wanting to extend the shelf life, specifically on mold.
Yeah. So the ingredients that we sell are heat stable. You can put them into the formula and they'll extend on mold through the formula. I'm familiar that processors are doing some surface spray after the fact. I'm not an expert in that area. You probably can teach me many things about that. But I think the biggest, well, going back to that story I was telling, and it's a bit folklore, but there's some truth in it, right? That biscuit that can drive a nail with has a water activity of like 0.6. It's dry. And the mold risk there is not that great unless the package is opened, humidity gets in, or there's some kind of water introduction, and then you could start to grow some mold. When you get into the meat style treats, they're still making these sticks and jerkies to 0.7 and below water activity. Well, the truth of the matter is we can protect shelf life at 0.85 up to 0.9. So it's not so much about solving a problem they don't have, it's capturing an opportunity that they do that they don't see. So if you're making a higher moisture treat, what does that mean for processing? Shorter time in the dryer. That increases the throughput of your plant. So there's economic factors there that are positive for your company. From a pet parent perspective, you've created a softer product. So that has some quality appeal for the company. And then just from an economic view, you're retaining water in the formulation. So the yield benefit of your product and the cost to produce the finished good is better. So those are the areas where we're trying to get some attention for what we can do. But to be honest, the culture doesn't change all that quickly. And so what we end up doing is providing an insurance policy for those treats that otherwise wouldn't mold except for some kind of adverse event, some package failure, some moisture uptake that's not expected, and then we can protect that. And that there's value. Customers want to, gladly so, customers want to purchase ingredients to do that, but we're leaving money on the table. I think we could do more.
What type of products are you?
So these are fermentation. So
okay.
What we're doing is we're taking a substrate, a sugar source like cane sugar. We can use vegetables for this, but basically we ferment those into organic acids and peptides that, if you want to call that a postbiotic, that would be fancying it up a degree. But at the end of the day, those actives, you put those in the formula, and they're going to be inhibitory towards those yeast and molds.
And how do you play with the clean label? You mentioned that's very important because a pet parent, they will look at the clean label. It's like you look at the treat, like, okay, just, I don't know, chicken breast slice, and that's it. Sometimes there's there's a market for product that they only see you dry them out, and that's all they want to see on the label, just chicken breast. And how do you play when you're adding those ingredients? Do you have to report it on the label? How does that work?
Yeah, so the ingredient statement could be a natural flavor. It could be a cultured sugar. We can use the species name of the fermentation product, so it has more of a kind of postbiotic connotation. That varies. Customers choose that from an AFCO view, which is the regulatory group that really decides how labeling terms are applied. There's some flexibility and some range in that. Buffered vinegars, which are used by our industry for listeria control, are fairly effective at mold control at certain ranges of water activity. And so you see some meat with vinegar. But if you compare, and I often do maybe to a fault, comparing jerky and sticks to the same type of product in pet foods, or pet treats I should say, extremely to the point of meat and salt, or meat, sugar, salt on those jerky lines. You see some sorbate in treats. In fact, quite a few treats will have sorbate on it. So there's a little bit more leniency towards longer labels and more complex labels already within the treat line. And then another factor for clean labeling in pet food general is if you're talking about diets, they've got to be nutritionally balanced. So all of those vitamin and mineral supplements have to come into the deck. And so there's no such thing as a complete diet that's 1 or 2 ingredients. It's 20, because you've got all of those nutritional inputs to go along with that. Even in like the kind of the wild west of this is the raw pet food area, right? And they've got to do some supplementation, because we find out that the feed regulators don't necessarily agree that dogs and cats should eat exclusively meat with no other kind of supplement. They want to make sure that there's complete nutritional balance there. So they'll do that. But coming back to clean labeling, yeah, vinegar, cultured sugar, things like that are pretty common.
I've been asked by a few processors, when using liquid smoke or natural smoke, what's your approach on that? When there's a smokehouse or a line, for a combination perhaps, or because there can be some kind of animal control effect on a natural smoke on the surface of the product, but there's people that, well, maybe the dog is not gonna like the smoke flavor to it. I think I've seen 2 of the, like in Mexico, you see a lot of bones, smoke bones, natural smoke, either femur bones, pork, beef, I mean, you name it. What's your experience on that? When somebody approaches you, whether use, let's say, a fermented product you'd mentioned that you spray before the product enters the smokehouse. Maybe I guess.
So, and I think I started out by saying I've been in this category for 10 years. My learning curve, I'm on the front end of it. So still learning a lot about palatability and how it gets incorporated into business decisions for companies. I had a customer that was concerned about aroma, not for the dog or the cat, for the pet parent, because they're going to open the bag and they're going to make a decision about that pet food. From personal experience, and maybe if you have pets at home as well, you know that some dogs will just go crazy over a rancid product. A fishy, an old fish smell could be really attractive to a pet and repulse the buyer, and the buyer won't return to that product. So it's complex. Specific to smoke, I don't have any experience on smoke. What I can tell you about our ingredients is we take them through that first step. So we'll basically choose what we think the highest dosage might be for a practical situation. We'll make our own treats. We'll send them off to a kennel. They'll test them in a 2-bull model, determine whether we always use dogs differentiate and have preference. That's a tie goes to the runner proposition 99% of the time, meaning to say that we want to show our customers that the dog is agnostic to the flavor difference with the addition of the ingredient. Now, there's stories of and anecdotes of fermentation products being positive towards palatability, and there's some data around that. The repeatability is difficult and expensive, right? So we know that many of our customers are going to do their own trials, and it's going to be circumstantial to their own formulation. So we let them do that part. We try to meet them at least part way with a proof of principle, and that's what we've done so far. So it's cats. We've done 1 or 2 cat studies. I'm not convinced they're repeatable at all. That species is a mystery. So there are a lot of experts on that subject that could answer your question on smoke. What we find as ingredient suppliers, we have an obligation to do some work and educate ourselves and make sure that we're being as transparent with our ingredients as we possibly can. And then there's a handoff there that those companies, especially the larger ones, are not going to take a risk on palatability. So they're going to do a lot of work themselves.
A lot of information. I appreciate all this that you're sharing. We were talking earlier about some of the, I don't want to say challenges, but maybe opportunities, and maybe we just veering off the topic a little bit. And how's your development? I mean, being in the last 10, 15 years, as far as what maybe you can communicate with undergraduates that you see here at RMC, some of the keys that have helped you in your career, professionally speaking. And I think it's sometimes I don't like the word mentorship, but I think there's always somebody that and perhaps you don't see it that time, but when they ask you a little, I don't know, questions and I for example, I've known you for, I don't know, more than 5 years, and perhaps before I was in the industry as a student. And sometimes that's what I like about RMC and this type of events, because you get to see students, you pair them up with people either in at the USDA or in the industry, and it's good to have that exposure. Mm-hmm. But if you were to tell maybe an advice to undergraduates that are about to, either go to grad school or go to the industry, what has helped you be here where you're at? So,
well, a good piece of advice I got probably 20 years ago is don't believe what you know, which is to say, challenge yourself, be curious, pursue the whys and hows of things in a intellectually honest and humble way, because that's how you grow. And so what I see at this conference, these students spend so much effort preparing their studies and investigating their topic. They're very, very smart, and they can teach us that have many years in industry how the science works, how the technology works. There's some reciprocation. We're at the reciprocal conference, so there's some reciprocation to that, which is to say, okay, well, how does the business work? Like, what drives decision making? And I just got an email from a colleague this morning. Hey, what about this technology? We should be looking into that. And my response back is, yeah, could be great technology. How is it practical? What would customers think of it? Why would customers be motivated? Negative inertia is a really powerful thing. There are not a lot of processes that once proven successful, you want to change. And so our challenge as inventors and innovators is to really be compelling in our argumentation as to why change. And it's far beyond just technical. So my advice would be, yes, bring your brain to work every day, bring your experience, and don't underestimate it, because the universities that you've come from and the experiences you had already in your young career are really valuable to companies. So don't be shy about that at all. And then step back, assess, listen, be curious about the elements of the process and the decision making of the company or the customer's company that aren't technical. And how does the psychology of that work? Because people want to adopt new technology that they trust, from people that they trust, that they can defend from a business perspective. And oftentimes that's not jumping off the poster or the paper. And so you've got to be a bridge to that if you're going to be, I think, successful in our part of the business.
Awesome. Thank you very much for sharing that. I think it's a combination ultimately, right? You got to know a little bit of everything, because at the end is a business. It takes, you use science a lot of the times to drive something, either a solution or a new development. But I think having the humbleness, I guess, to step back and say, okay, am I listening to also other opinions? Maybe I'm not always right. It's hard because no one teaches you. I think last RMC we also talked with Dr. Baz about that. Like, no one teaches you how to be humble, right? Mm-hmm. You just have to. Sometimes life hits you.
And the impulse I have when I come to this conference is, okay, here are the presentations and programs I should attend for business reasons, and I know 50% of that, but here's something I know 10% about, and I really want to go to the 10% because I just want to get that. I want to relate to that new topic, and I want to delve into it. I have a curiosity there, and I think a lot of people here have that, and so it's a rich environment for it. It's a little bit of an overload, but it's always fun. Brings me back every year.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Glad to be here.